Alright, what's going on, guys? Over the past week, I've been playing through a game called Codex Lost. This is a new indie Souls-like created by one developer where you play as a mage, adventuring through this retro fantasy world, seeking out 5 ancient grimoires that have been stolen and used to corrupt the land. And I think without a doubt, this is the most unique Souls-like I've ever played. Now today, I just want to tell you about my experience with the game so far, because honestly, I just feel the need to talk about it. This isn't going to be a review. I've clocked in about 20 hours so far, and I've only found 1 out of the 5 grimoires, which should tell you about how big this game is. Now let me also preface that I'm not sponsored by this game. The developer reached out to me to get my feedback as I play through the game, and I've quite literally been addicted to it. Now you're gonna hear me giving some very high praise, and my goal isn't to sell the game to you. In fact, it doesn't have a release date yet, and all the footage you're going to see is very alpha. Things are going to change quite a bit from now until the final release. As I said before, I just really feel the need to talk about this game, and let me explain why. Mage Combat has never been one of my favorite points of Souls games, and although I always make sure to do at least one mage playthrough, I always mix it up with a dex build or an intelligence/strength build. So I knew that going into this game it was going to take something other than the combat to get me hooked. And in the most basic sense, the combat is fairly true to Souls style Mage Combat. It's very slow and calculated, and relies very heavily on positioning, although there is a shield that you can parry with, block attacks, and a fairly reliable dodge. But the ideal scenario is being in a position where you don't get hit. Now that sounds boring on paper, and if it looks boring to watch, I agree. I was in the same boat for the first hour to 2 hours of playing the game, and I was getting frustrated because I was stubborn trying to play it like a Souls game or like Bloodborne, which you just can't do. And I expressed my concerns to the developer, and they told me this in response: your character is a mage, not a warrior, and you have to play it like that. And that was absolutely right. The intensity of the combat and the fun of the moment comes from managing all your different systems at play. The game consistently puts you in scenarios where you have to think, okay, does this situation call for a long-range spell that consumes a lot of mana but does high damage, or do I want to get in close to use a spell that costs 0 mana because I don't know what's around the next corner? And the game has you thinking that 100% of the time. So again, while it may sound and look a bit boring, it never actually is. And that's not an exaggeration at all. I'm being 100% serious when I say that, and the primary factor making that work is this game's genius level design. Codex Lost is an open world game, but not really in the way you're probably thinking. While it does have its fair share of vast open areas, the game is so densely packed and interconnected that I think calling it an open world is a bit of a disservice. The game is huge, and it is connected through areas you have to go through loading screens, but every area is classified as a different dungeon, all entirely unique and built into the world. For example, when you find a new open world zone, it will be an expansive area with anywhere from like 2 to 6 dungeon entrances. And dungeon doesn't just mean cave, it just means a more densely packed and traditional level. Every dungeon will also have multiple other dungeon entrances in it, to the point where in my 20 hours of playing the game so far, I've only fought 4 bosses. This game's exploration is addicting, and what's really genius about it is that it constantly folds in on itself, and not just for the sake of it either. It's actually useful shortcuts, ones that actually get used due to the game's less than frequent checkpoints. Your checkpoints are portals which can be found at key locations in the open world and can be used to warp between, but primarily to take you back to the game's main hub, which is called the library. And you do all your standard things here, such as leveling up, spellcrafting, and warping to different locations. But the library itself has multiple branching paths back into the open world, and every place it leads to also has other branching paths. And the library isn't even the only hub in the game, and not even the only place of quick access to other areas. The design of this world is genuinely mind-blowing. And what makes the exploration so addicting is the fact that it's actually worth your time. There's loot in every corner, NPCs hiding in the darkness, mini-bosses guarding a chest containing a new staff, or illusory walls with a shortcut to another dungeon. It's very easy to get lost for hours on end. It's hard to ever get bored exploring because there's just so much to find. Even going back through areas I'd previously explored, I'd find another path that led me on a 30-minute adventure, until eventually looping back to where I once was. And even in the midst of the open areas, there are so many things that are easy to miss, like a banker's hut where you can deposit your experience, a side quest involving lighting these purple braziers with the promise of a secret treasure when they're all lit, and small spots around the world to take a break and go fishing. Little things like these give so much life to the world, and is another reason why I have no problem spending hours on end just checking every nook and cranny. But part of what's going to make or break that exploration for you is whether or not you like the art style, and I have a lot to say about this. The game definitely looks a bit dated, and I think that's part of the reason why I like it so much. I grew up playing those really early 2000s in-browser RPGs on the computer, and the one I played the most was Adventure Quest Worlds. And I played those games so much, and they all had that sort of retro fantasy vibe to them that's been pretty lost in gaming over the last decade. And with Codex Lost drawing from that era of fantasy, it makes me feel like I'm back in one of those old RPGs and deeply hits those points of nostalgia for me. The game's not afraid to be creative, and I really love that because it makes all the areas feel very distinct. You're not fighting the same enemies every time, and it also forces you to switch up the magic you're using, as different elements are going to work better against different enemies, so you need spells that cover different ranges or areas of effect. And the characters all come in very different shapes and sizes, all adding to that diversity, whether it be a drunken skeleton, a blacksmith with a wheel of faces, or a grumpy crow telling you how far the world has fallen. Now, normally I'm not a fan of this whimsical style at all. I like my games to be realistic, and I like for the world to take itself seriously. But for some reason, this one has entirely sucked me in, even though it looks pretty cartoony. I've had no trouble getting immersed and seeing the time fly by. When I first looked at it, I wasn't expecting to actually like it this much. And for now, I still don't think I can quite pinpoint exactly what did it for me. But again, with that, I can totally see how it wouldn't be for everybody. One of the things I value most in a video game is it just allowing me to play it, and I really appreciate how much Codex Lost recognizes that once you're into the game, nothing's preventing you from exploring in every direction, and the way in which to find the proper path, of which there are many, is by what feels right. In the same way Dark Souls allowed you to go to the graveyard early, it's up to your intuition to decide which path is correct. And for the first few hours of the game, I learned that the hard way, and had to swallow my pride in order to find the correct path to the early game levels. And I also really like how it respects you to fight a boss in the way that you want to. Personally, I've really been loving the boulder spell and how much stagger damage it does. Combining that with a charm that boosts my stagger damage and a robe that gives me extra poise, I've had a lot of success against the more humanoid enemies. Now I'm just looking for a staff that combines earth magic and arcane damage, since I really like the base arcane spell. Overall, I think Codex Lost is going to be a very special game. Now again, this is not a review of the game. I still have lots of concerns, ones that I will address after I complete it, and the game is still a long ways off from releasing. Currently in the build I'm playing, there are several characters that lack voice acting, many of the areas have no music. What I'm playing right now is a vision of a game that once complete, I think will truly be a special experience. And again, everything I've said in this video is entirely subjective to me. I'm sure others will feel differently about the game once they get their hands on it, but I think it deserves all the praise I've given it so far. And for a solo dev project, I'm blown away. But if you enjoyed today's video and found the game interesting, check it out over on Steam, where you can wishlist it. Currently, there are plans to bring it to PlayStation and Xbox as well, although a release date is not yet specified. You can keep up with the game by following Freemena Games over on Twitter, and I'll try my best to answer any questions down in the comment section below. But with all that, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.